Welcome, I'm Kazumi and this is a devlog for a soulslike game I'm developing. In this devlog, I'll show you how I added a ledge push. So first off, what is a ledge push and why do I need it? Well, a ledge push is when the player reaches a ledge and tries walking off it. So we give him a little push, so his collider doesn't get stuck on the ledge. I was kinda oblivious to this actually happening in games since it's so subtle, but when I saw my player character can get stuck in this situation, I tried looking at how other games handle this. So I fired up Bloodborne and saw this is what they were doing. As soon as the center of your character passes the ledge, they push you so you'll drop. It's very subtle, but it feels like a little push and not just the collider sliding off the ledge. They also restrict you from going over the ledge unless you use enough input. But I didn't do that part. I might add it in the future if I feel it's missing. I'm not 100% sure this is what is happening. This could also be a result of the input limitation and then you have enough force to move you away from the ledge. But it did seem to me that you get pushed, and after coding it, it does get the job done and feels good in my opinion. Alright, so how does this work? It's actually pretty simple. When I stop being grounded, I cast 4 raycasts downwards. Each raycast is positioned around my capsule collider radius, 1 in each direction. These raycasts cast a longer distance downwards than the ground detection capsule cast I use, so that we don't get ledge pushed in case we're just sliding down on a steep slope. Basically, when 2 or 3 of these rays fail to detect the ground, it means we need to push the character. So we take the center of the character and the successful raycast position and make a direction vector to the center point from them. And then we push in that direction. And just apply the force to the rigid body. So let's see how everything was made step by step. I started by creating a function on my environment check class that casts 4 raycasts down at the ground, and I store the results in a struct I made for them. And this function returns that struct. I later swapped this to an array, so don't get too hung up about this struct. Each ray was cast at an offset of the capsule radius from the center of the character in one of the directions. On my movement handler class, I created a function that tries to push from a ledge. This function calls the environment check function that we just created. I then sum out how many rays hit the ground and then wrote the logic for handling if only 1 ray hit the ground. Basically, I just create a direction from the position of the ray that hit the ground to the center, and that is my push direction. I then called this try push from ledge coroutine when I stop being grounded. I call it from inside this function that is registered to changes for the isOnAir boolean. And then the plan was to push over several frames in that push direction inside this coroutine. I then added a longer duration for the raycast drawings so I can see them and press play. Things weren't working out, so I added a debug break so I can see what is happening. I still couldn't tell why I couldn't see the raycasts, so it was time to add breakpoints and debug. The first problem was the transform origin I gave this function to use, as the base position was the wrong one. After changing it, the casting was working, but I still wasn't getting pushed. I multiplied the push force, and fixed the if here that should be an else if, and changed the duration of the coroutine to be longer. And finally, I was getting pushed off. It was a bit too much, so I reduced the multiplying of the push force and shortened the coroutine duration. Now it was time to deal with the case of if there were two raycasts that hit the ground, which happens if the player walks off the ledge diagonally. I tried a bunch of things that didn't work out, and eventually I just calculated both direction from the raycast that hit to the center and added them together. That gave me the push direction I wanted. Next thing I did was go to my combat handler class and subscribe to the on-air change event as well. And in the case is on-air changed to true and the player is currently attacking, to cancel the current skill. I tested it out and it worked out perfectly. Now when I attack and stop being grounded, the attack stops. I then fixed the ground casting to work with an array, and also changed the coroutine to be a regular function and used add force instead of adding force myself in a while loop. I cleaned some of the code and this is the final result. Okay, here's the code rundown. When isOnAir is changed to true, the try push away from ledge function is called. Inside that function, we get the controller transform and call the cast 4-way ground function inside the environment check class. I give the function the cast origin, the entity hub, and a ref to an array of ground results. I give it an array as a ref because I don't want to create an array inside the function and create garbage every time I call it. This function also returns an int count that represents the amount of raycasts that hit the ground. Inside this function, all it really does is, it has a for loop which runs 4 times. Each time it calculates a different origin for the raycast and then calls the single ground cast function with that position. The single ground raycast function returns a ground result, which is a struct with a vector 3 for the ground ray origin and a boolean that represents if the ray hit or not. All this function does is do a downward raycast and store the result inside the ground result struct. If the showcast bool is true, it will also draw it. If it hit the ground, it will draw it green, and if it didn't, it will draw it red. After calling the single ground cast, if it hit the ground, it is added into the array according to the index, and the index and the count are incremented. At the end, we return the count. Back at the try push away from ledge function, we call the try get ledge push direction function, which returns the boolean and will set the push direction vector if it was successful. Inside this function, if the count is 1, we simply get a direction from the position of the raycast that hit to the center, and that is our push direction, and we return true. If the count is 2, I create 2 directions, one from each raycast position to the center, and simply add them together and normalize them. And that is our push direction. and then return true. If the count is anything else, this function returns false. And back here, we simply would return and not push. Next up, we perform a check if the direction for the push aligns with the input direction of the user. This was added more for the jump, which I will showcase in the upcoming devlogs. This function simply confirms that this is indeed a needed push and that the player actually meant going in this direction. Finally, I take the push direction multiplied by my local variable, ledge push force, and then use add force on my rigid body with velocity change force mode, so that it happens instantly and ignores the mass. As always, thank you for watching. If you have any questions, let me know down in the comments. Please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and may all your bugs turn into features.